thank everybody for coming out to Buxton's fireside chat and meet and greet that we had. I think it was fairly successful. We got some new people out. That's always a positive. We've got the former gubernatorial candidate Jim Libby, that's well known to the area, and Ande Smith, the candidate that'll be running to unseat Shelley Pingree coming up. We had.
There we go.
We had a great turnout. We got, Representatives Don Marian and John Kinney in the room. We've got the great Senator Amy Volk, who turned out.
Democrats there.
And although he had to leave early, Bill Gumbar, who will be replacing the retiring Linda Valentino, was also here. And we have the other congressional candidate who unfortunately had to suspend his campaign because he has got a new job, and hopefully we can get him to run for some local stuff, Barry Stevens, who I understand would like to say a few words.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was running. Some of you know that. A lot of you don't, which is part of the reason why I'm not. But the big thing here is that I got a taste of what this is like. I was running a campaign. I met Andy on the campaign trail at some meetings and so forth, and I was impressed with his demeanor, the way he spoke to the issues. And so I am going to be endorsing him. I've got it on my website, and officially I'm going to be sending out press releases to the media to endorse Andy for candidate for Congress. And just a couple of things that I want to really stress. Having been in a campaign, even though it was somewhat short, the duration of it, he's going to be doing the heavy lifting. And if you support him in his campaign, we need to get a lot of people to do a little bit to go out and help. And it's sometimes hard to ask, and it's sometimes hard to connect with people and get them to get to rallies. If he's going to beat Shelley Pingree, which a lot of people want to happen, I think he represents Maine people a whole lot better than a liberal progressive. And if we're going to do that, you really need to have people show up at rallies. You need to have people show up and show enthusiasm. Look at Trump. He gets a lot of people out there. I'm not going to make any comparison there, but the enthusiasm factor is a very important thing on the campaign, and that's going to be something that you've got to bring some friends, bring people, and do that little bit. You don't need to do a whole lot. You don't need to sign up and spend the next 6 months working on this campaign, but showing up when it's needed is a big thing. So that's something I'd really like to stress for everybody, and just tell you, he's going to be doing the heavy lifting. So just doing a little bit from a lot of people is a big help. Thanks.
Barry, thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. Go for it.
Great. Thanks.
Lastly, just a couple more pieces of housekeeping business. If I could ask everybody to silence their cell phones, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, I wanted to point out that Heidi Sampson, who will be also running for the state legislature down in the Alfred Parsons Field district to replace retiring Representative Jim Campbell, and Susan Wishwell, who's running for county commissioner down in the York, Elliott, Kittery area. And without further ado, I'll let the gentleman take over. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start, we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and our candidate has agreed to lead that.
Excellent. It's right behind you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
you, Jim.
Yeah, you're welcome. So our format this evening will be question and answer. So I have formulated several questions that the candidate has not reviewed or seen. And we also will open the forum for questions from the audience as well. So we're going to start off with the first question if you're ready.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Fantastic. And I'm going to read them.
Okay.
I'm going to read them, spend some time.
Oh, good.
The first question regards the program that's been coined Obamacare. And I've worked on the campaigns of both of our U.S. senators, and our senators actually claim that Obamacare is here to stay. So, yet many Republican candidates around the country are running on a platform that would eliminate Obamacare, at least most of the provisions of it. Our senators claim that ridding the system of things like pre-existing conditions and the pre-existing condition exclusion, insurance exclusion, and things like allowing young people at up to 26 years old to stay on their parents' insurance, healthcare insurance, has been a good thing. So we want to know specifically from you, are you for or against Obamacare, or are there provisions in Obamacare that you want to keep? Please inform the public.
Sure. Well, I'm glad to address that issue because it's actually been an issue that for the last 7 years has divided Mainers and divided Americans almost without end. I think to think about Obamacare and its efficacy or whether it's a good thing, you got to go back to first principles in it. And what began in that case is you had the most extensive piece of federal regulation that's been enacted in a generation, probably 2 generations, and it was done without any bipartisan support. And it was done in that way because of the belief that, well, Republicans just couldn't be made to agree with anything to reform health care, to make it better, to help solve the problems that people recognize across the country. But it was jammed through, and it was done without that bipartisan support. And it has been its undoing. So my first principle is to say that law, which was taken without support, must be repealed so that we can seek a solution that brings everybody together and that we can pick the right attributes, and you mentioned some that seem to resonate with folks and make good sense, but do it in a way that we all understand and all can align with. So specific issues with it, I would say I don't like, and I would support the repeal of Obamacare. In Obamacare, or as an adjunct to it, there was a tremendous emphasis on EMR, which is electronic medical records. This morning I was in Elliott at a pancake breakfast, and I talked with a former ophthalmologist there, and he had gotten out of the business. And part of the reason he had gotten out of the business is every day he spent more and more of his time typing rather than talking with his patients, rather than trying to address their issues, rather than think about what was this patient's need and how best to treat him. He spent his time typing. I have my own ophthalmologist. I went to him and he's talking. I don't want to, he says, I can't talk to you. I've got to type. I've got to get this done while I'm sitting there. Those kinds of issues seem like a good idea, but they were the outreach, the overreach of overregulation. I think things like pre-existing conditions have been a problem in the private insurance domain that we've had. It is a good thing if we can find a cost-effective, fiscally sound way to address them. But I don't think Obamacare was that. It was a one-time policy that was put to this country and taken without the kind of debate, meaningful debate, the kind of compromises that happen to come up with good legislative solutions that stand the test of time.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, we're going to change it up, and all of these are questions I think that a lot of you have heard on the presidential campaign. I mean, this has been a really raucous presidential campaign, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I think we've all appreciated that, and it's actually drawn a lot of attention to it. A lot of people have come out and voted. A lot of people have signed up for both parties, but particularly the Republican Party. Been a good thing. So, but one of the questions that they really care about is regarding their Social Security. So I have to ask you, would you favor changing the eligibility guidelines of our Social Security system to try to address the looming shortfall in the system, or are there other ways to repair it?
It's a super complex topic, and I'll just admit that up front. And I wish I could say there was a silver bullet that was going to address it. I remember when I was a young man I was in college, I remember, And the debate at the time when Ronald Reagan was president was, we need to fix Social Security now or we're going to have a problem. And we couldn't find a way to address what was then viewed as a looming problem that would be kicked into the future. And I think what you're talking about, Jim, is that future is today. We've come to that place where the working population of the United States has gone to a ratio that's not favorable or not sustainable for the kind of benefits that we've done. I think part of the challenge with that has been the difficulty in saying no. It's been considered one of the third rails of politics. And I think we've also taken a stance on the benefits that we've mismatched the contributions from a fiscally or an actuarially sound policy to be able to pay for what was there. And we've used and borrowed that money to sustain our federal debt. All of the Social Security dollars that are paid in are loaned to the federal government right now, and there's a filing cabinet in the Treasury building with little certificates of deposit, if you will, where the federal government's supposedly going to pay it back. But I think really to address Social Security is we've got to go through, and as in the case of Obamacare, come to a bipartisan solution about how we'll address it. My personal commitment is that we must sustain a level of funding and programmatic levels that our senior citizens have expected, they paid into a system, and they deserve to age with dignity based upon their contributions to a program. The specific mechanics of it, I don't have a quick, clean answer to it, I'll admit that, but I want to go to Washington to add a thoughtful voice to be able to work out that details, because as I said, from my time as a young man, the bill's coming due, and we've got to address it over the long term.
Okay. Great, and you know, we'll get back to some of the budget items that are discretionary and non-discretionary as we go along.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. This year, Republican candidates in Congress, the U.S. Senate, and even the presidency differ greatly on trade agreements. Even within the Republican Party, there's a great deal of difference between the candidates' positions. One candidate, for example, almost supports an isolationist strategy. Another candidate of the four that remain in the Republican primary really has supported most trade deals in the past and has been behind some of them. So my question for you is there a middle ground? Have trade agreements caused us to lose just far too many jobs here in the United States and not benefited us from the price reductions that we all expect when we sign onto these deals? What do you think?
I think, again, it's a very complex topic. There's little doubt that programs like NAFTA and some of the subsequent bilateral and even multilateral trade agreements we've had have precipitated a movement of jobs overseas. And it's been mainly in the manufacturing sector. We saw it in automobiles. We continue to see it in automobiles. I think it's too easy for us to say, though, it's the problem or the result of trade agreements. There are a million factors that come to play when a company makes a decision about investment. You see tax issues in this country that have strong implications. You see benefits costs, the activities of unions. Those all factor into a calculus about whether or not you can keep a job here, because we often think, well, they just go overseas. It's a lightweight thing. American workers are the most productive workers in the world. We do the best quality work anywhere in the world. But if the price point for that quality and that productivity is too high, then we are going to take the hit as a company, and we're going to move, say, this hypothetical company. I will go to a third world country or a second world country where even though I have to have quality problems and I'll have rework and it'll be more expensive in many ways, that hourly rate's too low. I think the trade agreements have exposed that and exposed the other systemic problems that we've got in our economic structure around that. The idea, the fact that we know today that many companies, many U.S. companies, have tens, hundreds of billions of dollars outside of this country that they cannot repatriate to invest in our factories, tells us that we have other problems to address besides that. My principal issue, and it's not really in line to your question, but when we talk about trade agreements, the first place I look when I think about TPA or TPP, which recently came down the pipe, is about sovereignty. I do not support programs that give the president the authority to take actions that Congress doesn't have control of, because if there's any lesson we've learned, and perhaps this is later in your questions, over the last 8 years, is the possibility of executive overreach, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, without the proper checks and balances, with a constitutional basis firmly in the hands of Congress. I think creates mischief and difficulty for us.
So that's the fast track authority you're talking about on the executive branch. So you know, one of the complaints I think about TPP and others, just to follow up, is
Sure.
that these trade agreements are written behind closed doors, and the public doesn't get a lot of access to the agreement's provisions until they come out. So are you saying that you'd be kind of maybe not in favor of the executive branch, their current authority? You would pull back some of that authority?
I believe, generally speaking, it has to be brought back to Congress. The Constitution was written, particularly when we talk about treaties, that in fact it is the Congress or the Senate, not the House that I'm running for, but the Senate that is the approver of those treaties. And I think that ceding of power out of the idea of efficiency or of ease of negotiation or for even avoidance of having to address the issue, I think that's caused us problems. I do not believe that we should be put in a place where sovereignty of this country can be put in the hands of trade negotiators without Congress having a bite at it.
Good. Yeah, very good. Thank you so much. In addition to being a former legislator, I'm currently an educator. So I have a great deal of interest in your ideas when it comes to the funding of higher education. A lot of what I hear from, in my role at Thomas College, a lot of what I hear from students is that we may have grown beyond the point of affordability. First of all, do you believe that? And second, are there ways that you would advocate that might approach the problem of the burden of the cost of higher education?
Well, it's definitely become, it's captured the popular imagination. There's no doubt about that. I remember when I was 18-year-old some years ago, and I was looking at private college. It cost $20,000 a year. It was almost unimaginable. And now, of course, you can't hardly buy a car for $20,000 a year. But I think it's a challenge for all of us today as we look at the cost of higher education. It is clear that the supports that we've put in place through Pell Grants, through student loan subsidies, have not gone the distance to pay for the kind of higher education that many young people need. But the question really becomes, what is the solution, or what is the cause of that growth? And I think it merits further study to see whether or not there are a couple of economic factors that may be driving this. So one factor is that the participation in the student loan market has been basically taken over by the federal government and its federal loan subsidies. So in the days, it might have been private banks that were making loans for student loans. And so now we have a different participation rate, or they have very low participation rate, and it's all from the federal government. What that drives is an influx of money that is intended purposefully to be broadly available to all students. Anybody can take it. And so, in a sense, people are writing checks that they will not be able to cash at the back end. And William Bennett had postulated in the 80s that the flow of federal money into the education system would, because it was unrestricted, would cause a rise in college rates. And I read in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago the analysis, and it wasn't, I think, conclusive, but we may be actually in that place where the free availability of money, easy in the sense of when you borrow it, not when you pay it back, but that easy money has inflated the cost of colleges in ways that, I go back to where I went to college back in the day at Rensselaer, a private university, and it's the most beautiful campus you could find in an urban setting. Brand new buildings, many brand new buildings, lots of faculty, lots of administrative people, deans of this and deans of that, and where does that money come from? Where were the students able to bring that money to bear? And some of it's from philanthropy, but a fair amount of it, I think, has come from the availability of money, because students will pay any price for that college, and it's gone up. So that's a long way around your answer. I'm not sure of exactly the right silver bullet solution, but it's not just making more tuition dollars available, much like we see in healthcare. You just can't throw more money into the system and expect that the cost side will be controlled, because it will expand to consume those dollars coming in, and our students will be left no better off than they were, or worse, when you hear, I think, in the Bernie Sanders of the world who say, well, we should just make college free. Well, that would be nice, except much like healthcare being free when you're a senior citizen or for other people, it just expands the cost. You can't throw money in on the expense side or cost side and not control the cost. So I think it merits study. I think we have to look hard, though, about the availability of money and how that's driven cost.
Yeah, and it's a tough question. And I'm going to follow that up with, I mean, since you're talking so much about the cost of government, and I think a lot of people in the room tend to agree, the national debt clock is currently at $19 trillion, and it's about to cross over, and that's the official number,
Right.
over to $20 trillion. Can you give the audience at least one general area of the federal budget that you would take a look at seriously to try to address the problem of the national debt?
I think we have to go back and look at every bucket of discretionary funding we have. I think if you were to do a broad cast over it, and I'll talk to some specifics, but the broad brush that we have to take over it is we are past the point where the nice to haves or something I'd really like to have that we can continue to pay for those. We must start with the must haves, our fundamental commitments at the social safety nets, to national defense, to immigration and protecting our borders. We have to go to the places there when we start with. But are there specific places? I think there's a big opportunity in the Pentagon, in national security dollars. I was just reading today that, and I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but I want to say it was $17 million for the Army to go out and compete over the course of the next 2 years what handgun our men and women in the armed services should be issued. Now, it's not like handgun technology has radically changed in the last few years. Why we have to spend $17 million for a $350-page RFP so that gun manufacturers can go out and decide and go and compete over what handguns are going to be used? Because the handguns that will be competed are the same ones you can go to Cabela's today and buy. So those kinds of programs, even in the Pentagon, don't make sense. And I work for my reserve life in the Pentagon, and I can tell you from my military service in the reserve world, there's a lot of people doing a lot of PowerPoint for things that do not add value to national security. We need to take those things, we need to grind those costs out, and then we can talk about how we're going to pay for the new shipbuilding programs we need. Another example, and I believe strongly in community farming. I believe thoroughly that's an economic engine that Maine's poised to take off with. I went, though, recently to the Maine Federation of Farmers Markets convention, and I walked in to the convention and I met the executive director, and in the course of just chatting with her, she says, "Oh, we've hired 2 new people." And I paused when she told me that, because farmers markets are not the highest of margin operations for anybody, and farmers aren't exactly knocking on the home runs to be in the Fortune 100 of Maine income levels. And she had 2 employees, and I thought, wow, that's weird. Where'd that come from? Oh, we got a grant from the U.S. Department of Ag. Congratulations, Shelley Pingree helped find that grant, and that's a great thing because farmers markets need help. But that grant was there, and they hired those people so the Maine Federation of Farmers Markets could help increase the participation of people getting SNAP benefits, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, basically food stamps, to buy at farmers markets. Now that's a fine thing, but she got a 3-year, and hold me on the facts because I'm not sure, I think it was about a $300,000 grant to help encourage people where to spend their food stamp dollars. Now, again, we want our farmers to succeed. Those are valuable things, but when you talk about are there places in government where it's a nice to have versus a must have, those are the kinds of things that we've got to find in government. I think they're everywhere there, and I think we can take hundreds of billions of dollars out of the government and not compromise the things that are the most important values we have.
Yeah, well, I read the Wall Street Journal too, and one of the areas that I often wonder about is foreign aid. Recently, there was an article about an African country that had misappropriated about $1 billion of foreign aid. Is that an area that you feel is on the table?
I think foreign aid is on the table. Everything should be on the table. You know, it's interesting. I had the great experience when I worked for the military in East Africa. I mobilized for part of the global war on terror, and I was sent to East Africa. That's where I spent my time in the country of Djibouti. My job was to represent, to build our strategy about where to do projects or to deliver assistance to local populations to undercut the causes of extremism. That's normally drilling wells, building clinics, things of that nature. But as part of my job, as you know, we would think up where we thought we should go do things. We had to negotiate that with embassies in the State Department, in particular, USAID, all the agencies. And one of the things that I don't think people know about is when you go to a U.S. embassy, you would think that you had gone to a cocktail party. And I don't mean it in like a flip way. A cocktail party in Washington where your friends and families came, because there's a representative there from the U.S. Department of Justice, and there's a U.S. Department of Agriculture person there, and there's an FBI person there, a Treasury person there. Almost any instrumentality of the federal government you can think of is represented in our U.S. embassies, because they deliver programs in these countries. And so when you say, is foreign aid on the table, we must maintain our commitment to Israel. So that foreign assistance, I think that's $1 well spent. Part of the peace deal that Jimmy Carter brokered is we provide foreign affairs assistance, military assistance to Egypt. Yeah. And that must be sustained, because that was part of the deal that kept the glue together and ended nation-state warfare in the Middle East in and around Israel. So there are places that we must do it. I think we've been successful in a mixed way in some of the things like Plan Colombia, for those of you who are familiar with that, where we went and spent billions of dollars in Colombia to try and strengthen that government and strengthen its rule of law and its democratic principles in the face of narco-terrorists. So there are places that we can go. But again, I went to countries where there was a lot of art exchanges, an attempt to communicate with the local populations by helping them see American art, or in stimulating their art economies. So again, maybe a fine thing, but is that where we need to spend our dollars today? And my answer is there are many things that are in the nice to have category that they might have a good outcome, but we've got to cut those out to balance our budget, because they're probably not effective, and we've got other things to spend that money on.
Very good. Thank you. So I think that brings us to the question of what legislation do you support, or what would you propose? What would be your first bill that you would propose upon entering Congress?
I think it doesn't usually capture the popular imagination, but one of the first things that I would propose, and I'd do it on my first day, would be the REINS Act. You may have heard that early in the presidential race. It was a Carly Fiorina piece. But what the REINS Act would do, and we have state legislators here in the audience, is we would do at the federal government the same thing that is done in Maine. In Maine, if the executive branch, the governor's office, enacts a new regulation, with the exception of changing punctuation errors or fixing spelling errors, that new regulation, after it goes through the process of vetting and hearings and all the rest, it goes back to the legislature for approval. The legislature has the authority to enact laws, and regulations are laws. That's how we do it in Maine. That's what the REINS Act would do in Congress. Congress should decide whether to expand the Clean Air Act. Congress should decide whether the Clean Air Act is the vehicle by which carbon dioxide should be regulated, not the president using his rulemaking authority, and then we run to the courts and ask them to adjudicate it. Congress should decide. I think that when we look at all the perils that we've had in this country and all the challenges we've talked about in this presidential election or the past ones, they all come back to the imbalance that has evolved between the president and its authority to use regulations, to use the phone and the pen and executive orders, and Congress's ability to rein that in. That's where the acronym for the REIN Act comes from. And that's important because there's a lot of mischief that can go on, and we've seen the divisiveness that has occurred in this country by somebody who's pushed to the logical possible limits their authority and dared Congress or anyone else to take them to court. That's not how our founders set up our government, and that's not how it should be. So the REINS Act for me would be something that should be pushed forward on day one.
How do you feel about what about the Paris Agreement? So in 2015, we signed on to something that is intended to reduce greenhouse gases. And it's obviously it's a worldwide problem. There's been some question as to whether or not, we're going to participate at the same level as other offenders. My question for you is, are you concerned about global warming? And do you support the Paris Agreement?
Sure. I'll take them in reverse order. I don't support the Paris Agreement, and the part of it for me that is the hardest to swallow is the idea that we as Americans are guilty for the contributions we've made to CO2 levels in the atmosphere because we ran an industrialized country, and that we have some penance to pay, that we should pay a disproportionate amount of penance into the world to change that. Because, and I say this, and this is not me throwing red meat on the ground, we burned a lot of fossil fuel fighting World War II. And we burned a lot of fossil fuels doing great things for this world. We saved the planet from fascism and totalitarianism and fought communism to a standstill and its death. We don't owe anybody in this country, in the world, any extra money because of what we did, because there's American blood on every continent that we spilled in pursuit of liberty, and everybody enjoys the fruits of it. That I have a visceral response to the Paris Accord when I see that. Is global warming real? There's no doubt that there's some changes in the climate that have occurred. I mean, the Greenland right now, Greenland ice sheets melting, and we read about that. But what I'm unconvinced of, and I guess that makes me a heretic, is whether it is CO2 emissions from industrialization that have caused it. This plant has gone through climate variations over time, and as I read the science and I look at people who challenge the science, not the emotional labels that people throw at you of being a heretic or a crazy person, I'm unconvinced that we know with conclusive certainty that it is CO2. So when we look at the Paris Protocol, to be able to we have to spend money to do things for other countries in an unregulated way that we don't have control over, when we have issues we want to address at home, and to address that as the cause of changes in the climate, I'm unconvinced on it, and I don't think it's a good spend.
Okay, thank you. You talk a lot, you refer back quite a bit to defense, and you seem to have a very good idea of history, and so I've enjoyed listening to you. My father was at Normandy. He's still a resident of this town.
Oh, cool.
And I think we handled things a little bit differently back then than we do today with drone strikes and some of the other things that we do. So I think my question for you is, do you think the drone strikes are effective? Especially given the number of jihadists that are out there. I'm not sure we can put a number on it, but it seems to number into the millions. Do you think the way that we're addressing this current war on terrorism is effective, or would you put boots on the ground?
Well, I think you got to be, so first I would say, with respect to drone strikes are a tool, like any other tool. And it's a awfully convenient tool, I think, for people who want to avoid entanglement to use them. So I support the use of drone strikes. I believe that they're effective tools because we have not as good an intelligence apparatus as we might like, but we have the ability to identify who the bad guys are. And so in that sense, I'm a fiscal conservative. If you're going to go fight a war, you want to do it in the most conservative, economically conservative fashion, because if you don't, you'll lose the war in the end. You will bleed yourself dry, and you'll come to a political accommodation because you're weak. So when you talk about the cost of a Hellfire missile that's hung on a Predator drone, if we can know where an insurgent leader is and kill them rather surgically, hopefully by minimizing collateral damage, it's a great way to do it. It's the most humane way to do it. It's a lot easier than dropping large bombs or blowing up buildings. So if we can do that in that fashion, I would support it 100% and use the best judgment we have and be as careful as we can to be actionable. With respect to boots on the ground, I think that without American leadership, we have not seen the countries of the Middle East particularly be able to step up and deal with their own issues. It has to be part of our toolkit. The question always becomes exactly what. And so to answer in general, I would say I believe that that's something that always has to be put on the table, because we saw in Iraq and we saw in Afghanistan, whether you like those wars or not, our presence with the local forces gave them the backbone and gave them the capability to do what they needed to do. And it's a little journey down history lane. It's worth remembering. If anybody here or anybody in the television audience has never read a book by a historian named Max Boot, like B-O-O-T, called The Savage Wars of Peace, it's a fantastic book because what you find in that, and it's a cautionary tale, we usually think about your father from the World War II, the great society, the great generation who fought that. And we often in our popular imagination think about that as how war is waged. This book that I mentioned to you that's worth a read has a contrarian view that says, most of our wars are very small wars. They're not big World War II scale events. There are incursions into Central America back in the 20s where we tried to stabilize those countries. That requires a long-term commitment, and it required U.S. Marines, often in the case in Central American nations, in conjunction with building infrastructure to improve the quality of life, schools, roads, water projects, to improve the quality of life of people. But we were there for decades. And we were there for decades because it took that to coalesce the local security forces, whether it's police. We don't use the military in this country to police our own people, but they often do in some of the third world nations. It took our ability to be there to provide the guidance and the training and the stability to help them be successful. And that's where, when you ask, are you for boots on the ground, I think we have that commitment in the world today, and we've got to be able to step up to it.
We've got citizens still that are in foreign prisons being held. Recently, there's been a bit of a controversy. Some families want to be able to pay ransom to bring their family member home. Would you be in favor of something like that, or is that a threat to national security?
Yeah, I don't support ransoming of people. I know it's a tragic circumstance, and I would feel tremendous pain, and if I were in their shoes, I might want to do the same thing. But I've walked the streets, if you will, of the parts of the world where piracy for ransoms, where kidnappings are part of the life and the economic flow of those places, and it will encourage more of it. There's just no doubt in my mind, and it's will lead to more people being captured. And much like Jefferson took a stand against the Barbary pirates, since we're talking history tonight, he decided that we weren't going to pay for American sailors that were hijacked and held for ransom by principal pirate states in the Mediterranean Sea, and where now Libya and other countries are. And he took a firm stand against it, and it ended. And that firm stand means not paying for those ransoms, because if people think they can get money from it, that's what they'll do.
Thank you. I think one of the questions in everybody's mind, again, as a result of the presidential campaign this year, is the various positions on immigration. What's your position on immigration, and specifically, what do we do about the 11 to 15 million illegal immigrants that are here today?
That is the million-dollar question in immigration policy, because like I think the general consensus among folks, I think most folks on both sides of the aisle, is we need to secure our borders. There should not be people coming into this country illegally. We need to stop that flow. I think there are some very important things we can do to stop that flow, that some of which are put into play now in a lightweight way, but we need to disincentivize people from coming to this country by thinking that they can come here and claim asylum if they're coming, say, from a Central American country. We need to change those incentive structures. We need to put enforcement back in the ICE, Immigrations and Custom Enforcement. The people who are there charged to patrol our borders and protect them and keep illegal immigrants from entering need to be given the authority and the tools to do their job. Those will go a long way to bringing us to a place where then we can pause, I think, and turn and deal with those folks. I don't support amnesty. I think I empathize with people who may have been brought here as a child by their parents and somehow have had productive lives in this country. I think we can recognize that there are people who have been like that. But they came here under a pretext, and what we learned when Reagan tried to kind of zero things out and start over in the 80s is it didn't work. Next thing it did was incentivize people to come, more people to come and continue the problem. And as we've seen in the Obama administration, by reducing the emphasis on enforcement and more of welcoming people, we've seen more people come in. The specific solution set for those people many whom have lived here almost all their lives and not been citizens, I think we have to think hard on that. All I can say is I would go to Washington to have a dialogue on that, because we have to solve that problem. I think it's simplistic and not realistic to say we're going to put them all on a bus and ship them across the border, and then we're going to let them right back in after they pay a penalty. I mean, that may sound good, but it's not practical, and I just cannot see Americans I can't see black suited SWAT teams going into homes and pulling people out where they've lived for 25 years and dragging them across the border so then they can get on the bus and come back the next day. That's basically what Trump has said, and I don't think that's practical. But the ultimate solution to that, so we do not create incentives for continued illegal immigration, I'm not sure what that is, but I'm happy to work on that issue because it's important to us all.
It's difficult, not to make it more complex, but I think I will because you're running for Congress.
Yeah, give it to me. That's right.
You know, there's also the issue of people seeking asylum. And I think the question is, what position should the United States take? We look at Europe and we see Germany perfectly willing. We've got other countries that have erected razor wire. Where do you fall on the seeking of asylum, particularly from those who have migrated out of Middle East, Syria, for example?
Sure, Syria. Syria is a very special case in the areas around Syria, even western Iraq, that has been, tribally, it's very much associated, ethnically, I should say, ethnically associated with the eastern parts of Syria to which it bordered. We, as a country, must draw a line in terms of who we allow to come into the country, particularly from those areas where there is a tumult of jihad, where there are people who are actively organized and motivated and desirous of bringing people into this country to commit terror acts here, both to destabilize the government and to drive us to be fearful in how we behave. I am not supportive of bringing people in unless we have a very clear idea of whether or not they're vetted and whether or not they are aligned with those interests. That having been said, world flows of refugees, whether they're seeking relief from civil insurrection or ISIS and terrorism, those people are best situated to be placed in or near their own countries, and when there is stability, to return to them. I do not believe that...
So you want to establish a safe zone, that whole idea about...
Yeah, I think you got to have safe zones because, it's interesting. I read an article, and I believe it was Emily Kane, that I had seen posted up not long ago, and it was a bit of a screed by a woman a young lady who had gone to MCI and had come here and felt like there was racism in how she was treated as a student member there. And she had left, but then had come back to this country because she had no choice. But she didn't really want to be here. She was from Iraq, if I remember the article. And, the punchline on that was, I think from the person who posted it, was, oh, well, Americans are just a bunch of racists, even you people up in central Maine, and isn't that terrible? We all need to be more sensitive. But really what struck me about it was the woman said, the young lady said, I want to go home to Iraq. I want to go back to the secular Iraq that I knew and not what it's become. And I'd like for her to be in the place that she wants to be. I don't think we're racist people. I think we have to be compassionate in what we do, but people want to be where they want to be. And I do not believe that the best solution is to put them on planes and bring them over here and drop them into Portland or Lewiston or wherever and ask them to assimilate into a different culture because what they had at home was destroyed.
Very good. Sometimes at Thomas College, when I talk about chaos theory, I bring up the United States tax code.
That's right.
Is there anything that we can do to correct some of the problems, to simplify the U.S. tax code?
Well, clearly, yes. I mean, we did it with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. We simplified it, and of course, it's crept back up to a much more difficult place. And it creeps up there because of there's a number of reasons why you get to that place. Certainly people feel like there should be tax deductions for noble things. People want to have new revenues, and so they find different ways to levy taxes. So can complexity be addressed? Absolutely. It has to be addressed because really it shouldn't take as much time and effort as we spend filing papers. I mean, even now Obamacare, it's roped into your taxes. So in terms of tax filings, I will say I support the flat tax now.
Steve Forbes?
Yeah, back from the day. I remember, I will admit, I scoffed at him when he stood up and said a flat tax. I said, how could we possibly do that? We need a progressive tax code. I remember thinking that in the early 90s. But the reason I believe in particularly for individuals, I believe in a flat tax now is because I believe everybody should have skin in the game. I believe every American, when they sit and they watch television and a politician walks up to them and says, you know, we need to do this good idea thing, they need to think that's going to cost me money. And the disconnect that we've created with people for not paying any income tax versus a group that pays a lot of income tax creates a schism in people, and that's not productive to our society. It's not productive to the debate. I believe that the folks that say that it's regressive to do it that way, I understand their argument, but I think the stronger equity is that people need to have skin in that game, and that with a flat tax and we get rid of the complexity you talk about, deductions and depreciation schedules and all those things. I think moving to that place makes it simpler, makes it comprehensible to people, makes it feel like it's fair in the sense that I know that you're not gaming the system because you're being taxed on the same basis as I am. And I think that will go a long way to getting rid of the kind of class warfare that we face.
Yeah, very good. So in the early teens and then after World War II, we gave the Federal Reserve System an awful lot of power. In fact, we made them a bit independent of our elected officials. I mean, which are you closer to? Do you favor this independence that allows the Federal Reserve to change the money supply, control interest rates to a certain extent? Or do you think that we should be revoking some of the powers of the Federal Reserve, and why would that be?
I'm probably not the best student of history in this area, but it is my belief from my American public school education is that the response, or the reason that we came to this place with the Federal Reserve is over a series of years where there was overt political meddling in affairs of currency, in affairs of setting interest rates, set the stage time and again for economic collapses in this country. I mean, the fact that we used to have the first Bank of the United States and there was a second Bank of the United States, those were generally attributable to political interference in that space. I think the challenge with the Federal Reserve today is much like all the rest of the federal government, we've begun to lose faith that they're an independent political agent. And if they were an independent political agent, I suppose we could be upset about it, but at least we could accommodate ourselves that they were professional, highly skilled bureaucrats who were working along a theme that we understood, and there was enough political impulse to that system by picking the chair that you could have confidence that they were working in a different line and we could turn the direction they needed. So I believe, though, we've lost faith in the same way we've lost faith in the Department of Justice, the same way we've lost faith in the politicization of the IRS. We do not have faith that they're an independent actor anymore, and I think that really gets to the heart of your question. So personally, I believe a politically independent body is appropriate for us. There's certainly opportunities for mischief, and I know people cast their decisions as such, but we need to restore the integrity of that institution and our faith in the integrity of it to do its job.
We have two more parts to this interview today, and one of them is audience questions, and at the end I have a lightning round for you.
Awesome.
So we want to, we've got a few members of the audience that have asked to participate. We want to open it up to some questions. Unfortunately, in forums like this, you can never get all of the questions out, so I want to just prepare you for that in advance. We're going to take a few, and at some point we'll have to move along, but we definitely are excited about having the audience participate. And so out in the audience, Jake, you've got somebody out there.
Why don't you just state your name and what your question is?
My name's Abby, and Mr. Smith, on your website pertaining to the issue of gun control, you stated that the current background check system must be revamped. Do you have a plan for that? And if so, what does that plan entail?
I think the challenges in the background check system is the lack of participation in the states, particularly with respect to turning over records of people who have been adjudged mentally ill and keeping that up to date. I believe the current background check system can solve the kinds of issues that we've seen, whether it's a Sandy Hook shooting or some of the other terrible tragedies we've faced, if we can use those systems appropriately to identify people who are mentally ill. My belief and my understanding from the study I've done of it is we do not do as good a job as we should in using those systems, keeping them up to date so that the people who are not allowed currently to have guns, whether it's a domestic abuser or someone like that, to make sure that that system will catch them procuring a gun. I think that once we see that we can do a good job with that system, if we find that there's places where that's not an adequate solution, then we address them next. But let's start by using the tools we have in place and making them effective.
That was an outstanding question, young lady. Thank you very much. We have another one.
My name is Brianna, and according to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And I do believe that would entail as well the education. And so would you agree that the U.S. Board of Education is technically illegal because it infringes on the rights of the states? And if so, would you support abolishing it as well as the laws that is passed to the states as well as Common Core?
Well, that's a great question. So you're referring to the Federal Department of Education. I've said publicly, I'll take your question, and if I miss a piece, you'll have to catch me because there's some layers in it. With respect to the Federal Department of Education, I would abolish the Federal Department of Education. I believe there are programs in place currently that we need to preserve. We talked about the cost of college. Pell Grants are administered out of the Federal Department of Education. I don't think we should get rid of Pell Grants. Those dollars as a direct grant to people for a public purpose, right now, we need to keep that. But I believe most of the work that they do does not improve the quality of education. I think it's an organization that does not add value in the system. In its absence, you wouldn't even notice it, by and large, in terms of educational effectiveness. You asked the question, though, about whether the 10th Amendment prohibits its activities. And this is why I go back to the idea of regulation and the role of Congress in regulation. Many of the Federal Department of Education's issues, and this is really where you're getting at, lawyers would say, that they respect the 10th Amendment because they don't compel anybody to do something unless it's justified in one of the other amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights say. They say it's not, and a good example of that is the race to the top grants that were used, because you mentioned Common Core. No state had to adopt the Common Core, but if you didn't, you weren't going to be considered for a race to the top grant. So I learned it when I did my master's in public policy as coercive federalism, so that you don't have to do anything, but if you want to get gazillions of dollars or potentially have access to gazillions of dollars, you're going to have to do it our way. There was a reason that used to be a speed limit of 55 miles an hour, which would be before your time. It was the same thing. If you want your federal highway money, you're going to have a 55 mile an hour speed limit. So whether or not that violates the 10th Amendment because it's consensual, I'm quite sure there's a case that says it's consensual and so you could turn the dollars down. But that's why I go back to deregulation. By pulling that power back to Congress and not leaving it for the Federal Department of Ed or any of the other federal agencies to create rules to dangle those dollars without really the control of Congress and try and drive and incent behavior. That's the challenge of federalism in this country and the power of the 10th Amendment. We should pull that back and take those dollars away. I would abolish the Federal Department of Education. I should come back to that. But that would disrupt budgets everywhere. So I would use block grants. I would take the budget in the current $71 billion budget of the Federal Department of Education. And after we pull out things like Pell Grants, you take those dollars and send them back down to the states in the form of block grants. And just not to lose that theme, we've got a long history of doing block grants in this country, and oftentimes they were not effective, and oftentimes they were worse than a federal program because there would be conditions and requirements and reporting obligations and this huge monstrosity of bureaucracy that went with them. Arguably, it was there to protect the federal fiscal responsibility to make sure the monies weren't misappropriated or misused, but then they grew over time to become the ways of providing political or policy control over those. I would send those dollars down for education with only the requirement that they be used for primary education. Put those dollars in the hands of the State Department of Education or ultimately the school districts, however states decide they wanted to do it, and let parents and teachers decide what they're going to do locally.
Fantastic. We have another question.
My name is Carter, and Mr. Smith, I was curious, what principles would you say you base your sense of morality on, and how does this play a role in your decision-making process?
My personal moral ethic?
Yes.
Yeah, you're referring to that?
And yeah, I'm just curious the role it plays in the decisions you make, if you feel an obligation to honor that in your day-to-day life and job.
Well, I'm not sure anybody would tell you that I don't honor my moral ethic, whatever it is and however I derive it. I believe in God, and I believe in that as probably the ultimate source of moral authority. I respect people's ability to decide for themselves what that dictate is. And I believe I incorporate that in my everyday life. It's actually a story that my wife, who's sitting here, we talk about whether or not you comport yourself as a good person. And I don't know if this really gets at the heart of your question. You know, I try and live my life every day, and the kind of the joke in the family is I believe I have to do one good deed every day. Whether it's holding the door open for somebody, or, you know, I see a mother sometimes carrying bags, I go and I try and help her, because if I think about being mindful in the present to help other people and serve other people, I believe that goes a long way of changing the dynamic in the world. So, you know, my candidacy is built on my compulsion, I would say, to serve. I've served my country in the military. It's always been a part of what I've done. I've served the community in the ways that many parents do by working in their children's events, but also working in municipal government. I've worked on boards of Big Brothers Big Sisters because I believe these are the kinds of activities, the kinds of exertions that people must make to help make the world a better place. So when you talk about do I comport myself with my ethics, I would say yes, and I do it every day. I try and serve the people because I believe it's that service to others is probably the greatest driver that I have in it. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Can I add something? I've asked that.
Sure.
Sure.
I've actually asked that question to a few speakers. You're the first one that's given me a straight answer. Honestly, that's the first time I've gotten a straight answer to that.
Okay, well, there's no higher compliment than that for me.
Yeah, thank you.
That's right, thank you.
All right, we have, we'll take two more. We'll take two more.
So hello, my name is Caleb Delano, and my question for you, Mr. Smith, pertains to the issue of cooperative federalism versus dual federalism. Dual federalism being laid out by the founders, which was in use from the beginning of the country up until the New Deal era, which was where states came up with their own regulations and they got money regardless. And then cooperative federalism, which was introduced by the New Deal, where states got money if they passed certain laws and certain regulations. Which one do you support? And I believe you touched on this a little bit. And what would you do to change it back to that cooperative federalist style?
You mean back to dual federalism?
Back to dual federalism.
Right,
Back to
right.
dual federalism.
I was listening, that was my test. I know, you're just, you're testing me. You know, when I did my master's at the University of Connecticut in public policy, and one of my faculty members, a great man, and he passed a couple years ago, his name was David Walker. Now, you would never have heard of David Walker, but David Walker was the preeminent, I would say the preeminent scholar and practitioner of federalism in this country. And he was such a nice man, he really was. He served on something called he was the executive director, I believe, of the Intergovernmental Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. And we spent a lot of time talking about federalism, this very issue you raise. Cooperative federalism is what he believed in, and he believed that it could be done in the way that you addressed, in the way that we moved. Really, we started the foundations of it were the New Deal. It was really in the Great Society in the 60s that took off to the era that we have now. And I touched upon it in my belief that we've got to pull back regulatory authority because it's used to trounce federalism or get to the 10th Amendment issues the young lady talked about. Part of the reason you moved in the direction of cooperative federalism was really the idea, and it was the problem I alluded to in block grants. If I just give you money and you don't use it effectively, even though I've given it to you for a noble purpose, and you squander it or you do something inappropriate even, I've not done my job at the federal level to ensure those dollars are spent appropriately. And that was the impetus, or I'd say the cover, in many respects, for cooperative federalism. I'd like to see us go back to that dual federalism system, but I believe what you find today and the difficulty in moving there, and I'd be committed to moving back to dual federalism, is states now, we have evolved as a nation from the 20s, or as the founders conceived of our nation, where government activity, government involvement in everyday aspects of life, whether it's food safety, whether it's telecommunications regulation, internet, net neutrality, whatever you want to talk about, there is a government presence in those places in our life that in the olden days, you took your ox cart and you drug your vegetables down and you bartered with your neighbor and that was it. You didn't need anything more than that. So to move away with the trillions of dollars that are spent, not just federal trillions of dollars, but state and local trillions of dollars on issues, to decouple that and move in a way that doesn't break the social safety net that we've created for people, and take the taxing authority at the federal level to spread those dollars around, would be advised. If I knew how to solve that, I would solve it, and then I'd go to world hunger and everything else right after. But my commitment is to move in that direction, because I believe that dollars spent must be controlled at the source of the tax revenue. And this idea of federal taxation and this ungainly system we've had creates a lot of mischief.
I think we have two more.
My name is Trevor. With respect to dealing with terrorism and such, on your website you say that our intervention must include a well-defined vision about what constitutes a successful outcome. How do you define a successful outcome? What is your vision as to what constitutes that?
Well, I think the first place, what I think you're alluding to, or what I was trying to allude to, is a focus on terrorism, or Islamist terrorism, and particularly in the Middle East, whether we're talking Syria and Iraq, and really Turkey being involved in the entire Middle East flow. So that was, when I wrote that, it was more directed there. But I would say if you had to define success in the most global terms, the simplest, the highest terms, is we should be secure as an American people in our own country against those people who would do us harm and attempt to undermine our form of government by instilling terror in us and having us cash out our beliefs. So really, for me, it's security at home from those areas. That's the highest level of success. The part that you read, though, what I was alluding to is this. It is a mistake for us to go and say, we're going to defeat ISIS. That's what we've got to do. Because ISIS is one small part of a problem. ISIS is the representation or the manifestation of a conflict between Sunni and Shia Islam going on through a proxy war that's being waged in other places. And you also have the intervention of the Kurds, who have ethnic pockets and an ethnic identity that's representative in Syria, it's representative in Iraq, it's representative in Turkey. So what I was alluding to in terms of defining success is we as a nation, and I believe while we're influenced by our principles, have to be practitioners of realpolitik, and we've got to decide what we think the best outcome there to secure our safety and security at home and bring peace to the region. I'm not sure I know. There's a lot of people who've thought a lot of things about that, but what it does mean is we can't just ignore the problem of the Kurds and their desire generally to have a national identity in the way they had probably in the early part of the 20th century. Right. So we must pick and choose what we're willing to have be those outcomes, and not just try and massage it along, as I believe President Obama has done with the support of people like Shelley Pingree. Just kick the can down the road so that we can have another global insurgency. We can have another set of civil wars later on when there's a new president around to solve them. That's the conditions of success I think we have to pick. I don't pretend to say I know what that is, but I'd be pleased to sit in Congress and help add my voice and my reasoning to try and come to what that best outcome is for America.
Okay. We have another.
Hello, Mr. Smith.
Hello.
My name is Abby. Pertaining to on your website, in regard to education, you stated the answer does not lie in complex approaches that transform our schools and universities whose primary concern is regulatory compliance. We should not be teaching questions on a test or mindlessly following trendy education approaches like proficiency-based education. We must grow a generation of Americans who understand the Constitution and our nation's history and have read the classics and can do long division. So what steps do you think are needed to prepare our educational system to its original purpose? And also, what do you think, what would be your vision of what it's supposed to be like?
Well, those are both good questions. I would say the first part from what you read, and I addressed it earlier, I believe, some of you may have heard me say this before, as a member of the State Board of Education and as a vice chairman of the Charter School Commission, I talk with parents and teachers and students a lot. And I've heard them from all over the state. And the thing that drove me to write those words from the website that you mentioned is really that if I were to put a label or to diagnose what I hear and try and synthesize it, that's the best term, to synthesize what I hear is parents particularly are losing faith in their schools. They feel disengaged from their schools, and yes, we have school boards, and in Maine, we're big proponents of local control, but somehow people don't feel in control. And so what I believe is that we have created a structure where we've hyper-complicated the delivery of educational services to students. And in doing so, a lot of those threads that have come from that complexity have created bureaucracies, and many of those threads go back to Washington. And so I would say this, I think the most important thing that I could do in Congress, as a member of Congress, is to eliminate the Federal Department of Education and get those regulations out. And it's both for their impact, but also because when you go and you talk to the administrators, when parents go and talk to administrators, what they hear is, we can't because there's a requirement. We can't make a change that you think is good, there's a requirement. Or they tell the school boards the same thing. There are requirements, there are rules, there are testing obligations. Oh, the federal regulations are never going to let us do that. I want to take away that excuse. I want that excuse to go away so that the state of Maine, State Board of Education, the legislature, can make the decisions about what best to do here in the state of Maine. And that really doesn't get to the issue of like, how would I fix it? Because I believe the people of the state of Maine would have a rip-roaring good fight in Augusta to try and decide what that is. And I think that's where the fight should be, not with lobbyists in Washington trying to shape programs to insert agendas to create some outcome that they believe it should be, only to have them ripped out when the next party takes power and start off on a different path, because neither go to the right place. People in the state of Maine, closer to parents, should make the decisions. You mentioned proficiency-based education. That's not a federal issue, that's a state issue. But my personal belief is that's a tragic error in the state of Maine. I don't believe that's leading us in a good place. There's some good pieces about proficiency education, like if you, let's say, you had an agricultural orientation in your home and you were a 4-H member. Proficiency education sold, and there ought to be a pathway where you can say, look, I could take this part of my biology class, but I raise goats or sheep or cattle, or I work on my farm. Like, I get how that works. I understand that. We should be able to give people credit for that. Why not? So that you can spend your time learning something new, not sitting in a class to punch the ticket. Proficiency was designed to do that, but we've gone way out of the bounds on that. And when you get to a place like my stepson, 11-year-old stepson, he goes and he has a bad day on his test, the teacher sits down with him and tells him what he did wrong, and he takes the same test again and gets an A. That's where proficiency education's taken us. That's why we don't have confidence in education. But that's a solution to come out of Augusta.
Great. Okay, we are to the lightning round.
Oh, that's right.
The lightning round, and then I'm going to give you also a chance for a closing statement.
Great, thanks.
All right, so just a few of these. Let's
Okay.
see how you do. Put you on the spot a little bit. Favorite Maine food?
Favorite Maine food? It's got to be a blueberry.
Good. Lobster's the correct answer, but just kidding. Just kidding. Blueberry's good. Favorite Maine ice cream?
Oh, I like the Moose Tracks. I think that Shane's of Maine makes
Shane's
that.
of Maine.
Yeah.
Good, good.
Maine company.
Favorite Maine product?
Maple syrup.
Good. Favorite Maine place?
You know, I love Scudic Point up in the mid-coast there as part of Acadia.
Excellent. Favorite Maine beach?
I grew up going to Popham. It's still my
Popham.
favorite Maine beach.
Yeah, sure. Last one. Favorite Maine politician?
Jim Libby.
Now we're talking. Boy, oh boy.
I'm learning quick, huh?
Yeah, boy, you learn
As a
a lot
political
quicker than I
outsider, I'm
thought
trying
you
to pick
would.
it up here a little.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I certainly did. I learned an awful lot more about the candidate, and I was very impressed with the depth of knowledge, and particularly in terms of your history, your knowledge of history. Enjoyed that greatly, but also your knowledge of our current events that are so important to us. So I want to thank you on behalf of everybody that's here. Done a wonderful job, and good luck to you the rest of the way.
Jim, thank you very much. Gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
I think I got a closing statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll sit down before you get off there. But I just wanted to thank everybody who came tonight, everybody who on public access will look at this. I had looked forward to having a debate on the issues, but I felt like I had a debate with Jim on that, so it was a lot of fun in that regard. But I think these are the important things to talk about, and I'm gratified for the opportunity to speak to everybody about hard topics, the kinds of topics that we need to take up in Washington, and the kinds of things that are going to make Maine a better place and secure the future, not just for the people here today, but those that come after us. So I appreciate your support and opportunity. I look forward to seeing you all and everyone I haven't met yet on the campaign trail. And again, thank you for coming and your time this evening. I wanted to thank Jake and Lindsay, particularly here in Buxton, for putting this event on, because I think it's great to have the issues out, and I appreciate your effort, and also the York County GOP for sponsoring this event and making it possible here in the state of Maine, and all the sponsors who made it economically possible for us to do this. So thank you to you all as well.
Thank you.
I just wanted to give a special thanks to Jim Libby for volunteering to do this.
Sure.
And for Andy for coming down.
Thanks for putting it on, that's right.
And if you're interested, if you like what you heard tonight, andyformaine.com is the domain to find out more about him. A lot of people ask questions off his website. That's where they found him, andyformaine.com. If you're interested in getting involved with the local committee, the York County committee, or your local committee, for those on public access viewing this not in York County, it's yorkcountyrepublicans.com. And for those local in Buxton, if you would like Buxton Republicans on Facebook. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Hope you had a good time. You know, look for more events on the calendars and whatnot.